Hi, everyone. I haven't had quite a warm welcome like that for a while. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. You guys ready to get started? Okay, so I wanted to start off by telling you guys why I wrote this book, because today is a speech about loneliness, which is obviously dovetailing off the fact that I wrote this new book. So this is how it went. I didn't actually know that I began writing this book back when I was about 15 years old, but it's the real truth. I was miserably lonely. I was so lonely that I tried to commit suicide multiple times, and those of you who have struggled with addictions, you also know that loneliness is the root of all addictions as well. I was heavily addicted at that time. I was a cutter, and I was also addicted to ketamine. Now, back then, I was in the same position that most people are when they're feeling desperately lonely, which is that I'm looking around at the world thinking I'm the only one that feels this way. That's what loneliness does, and that's the first thing we have to get about it. Loneliness tells you that you're the only one that feels it. So what I felt like growing up is I'm just the only person that doesn't belong here on planet Earth. Everyone else has a family, everyone else has a partner, everyone else has somewhere to belong but me. Now, those of you who know my story already know that through suicide, I figured out how to commit to life, actually, because I came to this point where it was like, I'm not actually going to be able to create a life that I want to create unless I commit to life. And I really noticed that was what my suicidality was about. I'm sort of fence-sitting between wanting to be here and really not wanting to even be here at all. So I played this game with myself back in the day, which was I can always kill myself tomorrow. Now, that sounds like super depressing for a lot of people, but actually using suicide as a safety net is what made me survive. So I started this game because at first I couldn't commit to anything more than 5 minutes. So I started a game that was, I can always kill myself in 5 minutes. So what do I do with these 5 minutes? And my thing was, I have to, if I'm going to do that, I have to commit to those 5 minutes 100%. I don't get to even think about killing myself. Now that 5 minutes turned into maybe half an hour. And then that turned into an hour. And then that turned into half a day, and that turned into a day. So the way this game went is, okay, I can always kill myself tomorrow. What am I going to do with today? And what I found when I really poured my energy into a day was that life became, a lot better. When you're putting energy into whatever life you want to create, things start to manifest. So ultimately, that game got me into a situation where I was able to get out of the hell of my life, and I was able to actually connect with some people. Those of you who have been watching know Blake Dyer. He is going to be up here on stage with me in a minute. I ran away to him when I got away from all my childhood abuse. And, yeah. Yeah, Blake was the first person that I ran into where I felt like, maybe I might belong somewhere and with someone. So what I did was I patched my life back together again, and this is like even years down the road, I actually had connection, but I was still telling myself the story that only I had experienced that level of loneliness. It wasn't until I got into this career, actually, where I was like, okay, I'm going back in the direction of spirituality, that thing I wanted to escape from for years and years, and I'm going to start teaching the world about the kind of stuff that I know. And it didn't matter what country I went to, it didn't matter what continent I was standing on, didn't matter whether a person I was talking to was considered popular, famous, or not, whether they were male, female, every person had the same story for me, which is I feel super lonely. So I started to realize this is an issue that's like a lot bigger than just me. And I started to realize what I told you first when I stepped out here on stage, which is that loneliness convinces you that you're the only one that feels it. So what I had in my hands was this epidemic issue. Now, I started to kind of look at the world with this view of everybody's actually feeling lonely. Why is this the case? And what I realized is that loneliness is something that is far-reaching beyond an individual's sense of suffering. This is actually a collective social epidemic. And what I realized is that separation, which is what is fueling this sensation of loneliness, is actually behind every crime, every addiction. Now, when I say every crime, most people are like, that doesn't make sense. Like, how does loneliness have anything to do with crime? Like this. If I can commit some atrocity against you, whether it's killing you or stealing from you, I have to first feel disconnected from you to do it. Otherwise, if I create some sort of an injury to you, I will feel it myself when I'm connected. So you have to first feel separation in order to become addicted, in order to commit suicide, in order to wage war, in order to commit a crime. So what I'm looking at here in the world is this collective epidemic of loneliness actually creating the world of suffering that we're experiencing today. So for that reason, I decided I have to figure this thing out. And when I looked at my life and the path that I had taken to actually get connection, at that point I couldn't figure out what it is that I had changed. So I decided that I was going to go on a shamanic journey. I decided that shamanism was the path I was going to use to figure this out because it's the most brutal, let's just be honest. Those of you who have taken any shamanic medicines know that that path is like really in your face. So I decided, this is about 3 years ago, to fly down to the jungle of Costa Rica, and that was where I was going to begin this, what turned out to be a 3-year journey of figuring out loneliness 100%. So for 3 straight years, loneliness was my focus. I wanted to figure out what created it. I wanted to figure out how to resolve it, and not just for an individual like me, but for every person on the planet. And it was a really hard series of years. What I came out with, actually, because, I mean, how many of you, by raise of hands, just out of interest, have been on the shamanic path at all? So, like, some of you, yeah. Well, as you guys know, what I was able to take down with me into the jungle in a backpack was basically a collection of these lined pieces of paper. Just things to jot down insights on in between vomiting. And in between, crying my eyes out and trying to change my own life. So what I emerged with after these 3 years is this giant pile of totally crumpled, like tear-stained, sometimes vomit-stained pieces of paper. And I got back home with it, and I had the answer, but it was like, my life is just totally turned upside down by what I figured out. Because when you dive into loneliness, what you're seeing in the world, actually, is the fact that we live in these parallel realities. And it was so painful of a realization. I mean, the shamanic path does that to you, but when I really looked at the world and I realized that I could be standing in the same room with another person living in a completely different perceptual reality than them, I had a very hard time digesting that truth. And I also understood my entire childhood. Because it's something that I had been struggling with, like, how is it possible that the kind of stuff could happen to me at the same time as living in the same house as my parents? And it wasn't until I understood the parallel perceptual reality that I really got the why and realized how dangerous it was. So after I swallowed that truth, I got these pieces of paper together, and I turned that into this book. So this new book of mine, The Anatomy of Loneliness, is basically what was written on those pieces of paper, but organized in a better way so that you can actually understand it. So I want to dive into loneliness and give you a little sampling of what it is that creates loneliness, because it's really important that we're not just bypassing instantaneously into whatever creates connection. We have the tendency to want to do that. We want to skip over awareness, and we want to go straight to, well, tell me how to fix it. But you have to understand what creates loneliness in order to fix it. If I can get you just where you are to shut your eyes, I want you to turn all your attention inward. Feel how your body feels. You are still in the frequency of shame. How does it show up in your body specifically? What sensations are occurring inside your body? I want you to memorize this feeling. Nice manifestation, y'all. We got it? Okay, that is how your body experiences shame. You can open your eyes again. Every single emotion that you have is almost like ice over the top of a personal truth, if that personal truth is the water underneath the ice. So that emotion of shame is conveying to you that something is happening. All of your emotions function like a compass. So a compass says, you're facing north, right? The emotion of shame is telling you that internal fragmentation is occurring within you. And I'm going to demonstrate what that means. First, our basic assumption about loneliness is that loneliness only ever happens because of what's happening outside us, right? So we tell ourselves the story, I feel lonely because there isn't people in my life that I feel close to, right? But the primary thing that is actually causing the sensation of loneliness is internal fragmentation. And the fact that we don't recognize this is why we haven't been able to resolve shame or loneliness. And the external loneliness that we're experiencing in our life, meaning people aren't able to actually have intimacy with us, is the direct reflection of this process that's happening inside us that I'm going to show you now. The first thing that you have to understand in order to understand shame is that we are a social species. And this is something that I'm going to be canvassing around the world trying to get us to accept. Because you have been suckled and bred on the concept of independence, which is complete, total BS, all right? Like, you gotta throw this idea out the window because we are independent, obsessed to the degree that we are completely isolated in our social species. A human being is no different than a deer or a wolf. We have a herd animal and a pack animal. The survival and well-being of that animal has entirely to do with its closeness within a connected social group. And a human being is no different. The people who try to teach you that independence is a really awesome thing, you can do everything on your own. You've heard all these speeches, right? Everything you want is coming from within, right? It sounds good, right? Why? Ask yourself, let's be super honest. Why does it sound good? Okay, so you say it sounds good because you don't need anybody. Why is that a good thing? Okay, so why would somebody think that that was an awesome thing? Because in their childhood, early experience, or even now, they feel so powerless to actually getting that genuine connection that any type of mentality or modality that teaches them that they don't have to depend on people they can't depend on feels good, doesn't it? Does that make it true? No. And this has got to change, you guys. Not just because of you in your individual life, this has got to change because if we operate from that mentality, we're looking at our children saying the same thing. We're looking at the criminals that are sitting in our jail cells saying the same thing. We're looking at the people who are mentally ill saying the same thing. Do I need to continue? This epidemic of isolation is being perpetuated by our idea that we are not a social species. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that connection is the single most important human need. It is more important to your biological organism than food and water. If you don't believe me, just go watch somebody that's in a serious stage of grief. Watch somebody in a really bad breakup. Can they eat? Can they drink? Then it's not a bigger need. End of story. So connection is the single biggest need for a physical human. And this is very serious for us because we are totally relationally dependent. You, as adults, you're not really in touch with this aspect of your being anymore because you can go get a taxi. If you need food, you can go get food. As a tiny little baby, if I was to take a little infant away from its mother and set it on the floor, would it survive? We are totally relationally dependent, and more so for our species than almost any other species on this planet. And so, we are wired, even in our central nervous system, we are wired to absolutely have to have closeness. And this is where things get a little bit hairy, because our process of socialization, and everyone in this room has been socialized, it's where we learn things that are okay to do within society and things that are not okay to do within society. And of course, that's going to change based on what your mom's like, what your dad's like, what their religion was like, what the culture was like. I mean, it can vary like crazy, but you are still all socialized. And socialization is the process by which you are taught what about you is acceptable versus not acceptable. So here's what I want you to get in your head is the idea that when you come down into this physical embodiment, you are, for lack of a better word, in a state of completion. It's not entirely true because you do come into ancestral trauma, but for the sake of what I'm going to demonstrate, I want you to imagine that upon coming into your life, you're in a state of completion wholeness. That means that you contain within you, because you are pure potential, you contain all polarities. I am meanness, I am also niceness. I am darkness, I am also light. Now, what society does is it starts to split you up. It starts to say, that's good, that's bad, you get to be this, you don't get to be that. Now, let me show you shame. I need one of you to be mom. You. Okay, so right now, I want you to pretend that this is one child right now, okay? So they're one. A little kid. Let's say that this kid is 3 years old for the sake of this demo. 3-year-old child, and here's mom. Now, this doesn't even have to be a bad mom, okay? This can be a really good mom. Come here. What was something in your childhood that your mother disapproved of?
My dad disapproved more than my mother.
Of what?
My loudness and...
Oh, I love it. Okay. Okay, so in this household, loudness is not okay. So, what happened when you were loud? What did Dad say?
Keep it down, the neighbours will hear, and don't let people laugh at you. People will laugh at you, not with you, and that kind of thing.
All right, so closing your eyes for a minute, I want you to become very familiar with two movements within the universe. The movement towards and the movement away. Now, feel in your body. When I say, I love you so much, you're precious to me, does that feel like I'm pulling you towards me or pushing you away?
Pulling towards.
That's towards. That's the movement towards. Ready for this one? Keep it down. The neighbors are going to hear you. Did that feel like a push away or a pull? So watch what this looks like. Whenever mom or dad disapproves, it's experienced as a push away. Now, what did I just tell you about survival in the human race? What's the most important thing in the universe to you? Connection and closeness. So I've just actually threatened the survival of this little girl. I'm not aware of it because I'm just trying to get her to comply. But the nervous system registers that as a threat to survival. Now, how many of you are familiar with triangulation? Not very many. Ooh. Well, triangulation is a really fun thing that happens within all social circles, actually. It's when we try to establish rapport through division. So let's put this in an external context first, and then we'll do it in an internal context. If I'm going to triangulate her against her, I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, did you see what she did yesterday? You know, she shouldn't be treating you like that either.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I agree, she shouldn't.
Look what I just did. What I did is I pushed her away in order to establish rapport here. I created closeness through division. So watch what happens with shame. When mom turns against the child, and this could be any adult, I'm just using mom because this is the one that we feel the most close to, usually in childhood, so it tends to be the deepest push-away wound. I disapprove of the fact that you were loud. Those freaking neighbors could hear us right now. Quiet down, right? What I'm doing in that moment is I'm pushing her away, right? Pushing her away because of the loudness. Now, the only way that she can establish closeness with mom again is to do what? Internally triangulate. Okay, so I'll demonstrate this in a second, but ready for this? Consciousness can split like water. The physical body can't, right? I can't just like cut myself in half and keep on living. It's not gonna happen. But consciousness can. It functions like water splits. So you've seen a river, right? And the river goes right and left and it's still flowing. It's not dead. It's just divided. Your consciousness can continue dividing and dividing and dividing. So the way that this child is going to create the triangulation against themselves is by pushing part of themselves away. If mom is disapproving of her loudness, she is going to turn against her loudness. She will cut off that aspect of her being, and by doing so, create rapport with mom. You just watched an internal split being created. Now, this particular split is the split of I'm pushing a part of myself away. That is the definition of shame. That's shame. So every time you feel that feeling in your body that you just felt that I made you feel, that's what's occurring. By you recalling what you feel the most ashamed about, you re-feel the feeling of this splitting. So that's what that emotion means. Did you get that so far? Pretty cool, huh? But here's where it gets painful. For some of us, we had parents and adult figures in our life that made an enemy of certain aspects of us. So we turned against those aspects of ourselves, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things. Others of us could not please the adults in our life, could we? Can you raise your hands and just be like super honest about it if you were that type of person? Higher average in these types of circles. So if this was the case, then you created split after split after split after split after split. You had to make an enemy of almost all of yourself. Now this is what creates self-hate. No matter what you did, you couldn't split yourself enough to establish rapport with the parent. So you now have a core self-concept of shame. Now, how does this play into loneliness? You're probably interested in that now, right? No? Okay. Let's just take you two. Have you guys ever heard the concept, you can't punch something without your hand being punched too? Push her away. Better than that. Oh my gosh, you're obstinate. Let's just pretend that it actually worked, okay? You can't push something away without pushing yourself away at the same time. What is this that I'm in right now? Between them? Space. Separation. This is loneliness. The more of this you have inside you because of those fragments, the more lonely you are. And the more of this there is, the more it mirrors in the external reality, right? We live in a time-space reality that's based on the law of attraction, which is easily rewritten as the law of mirroring, which means that if all you have in your internal reality is lots and lots of separation, what's mirroring in your external reality? Lots and lots of separation. So you're the person who in your external life, you're very, very distant from other people. Sad, huh? So that's the dynamic of shame. Now, I'm going to show you why we haven't solved shame, besides the fact that we don't understand that this is what's really creating it. The reason we haven't really solved shame is because we make it worse. In the self-help industry, in the spiritual field, we make this 10 times worse. Ready for me to show you how? Now, mom is gone at this point, sitting back at home, wondering why daughter is addicted. Hashtag truth. Okay, so you guys are against each other, right? Because you've turned against, you were the loudness, right? Yes. Yeah. Okay. You've turned against your loudness. Now, you feel embarrassed about this. So what happens in your day-to-day reality is that you keep lining up with experiences where you're super loud. I know what that feels like because I'm American. Not kidding, you guys. Every time I land in London, I am like the loudest person in every room. The cab drivers are all looking at me like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. I'm like, what's that? Oh my gosh. So I know what it feels like to be ashamed of this one. So you've turned against this aspect, right? Now, you go to a self-help seminar or you come to a spiritual seminar and you tell me, I feel really ashamed of how loud I am, right? What am I going to do usually?
I don't know, heal it somehow. Heal the need to be loud.
Oh, there we go. We heal the need to be loud. So actually, you've just stepped into more socialization around the same ideology, right? This is what it looks like. Let's go find your quiet part. You're not as loud as you think, sweetheart. You should love yourself more. Look what I've just done. I actually enhanced the split. And not only am I turning her further against it, I'm doing something worse. I'm convincing her this doesn't exist. So what's the solution to shame, you guys? I heard the magic word, integration. What does it mean? Yes. The solution, well, what does self-love mean? You guys, seriously, like, I love these types of talks because we just keep spouting these words. It's like you sat in front of spiritual teachers, we've given you words, and you're like, oh, self-love. I'm like, what does that mean? No one can answer me. Healing, what does that mean? I don't know. I'm gonna make it practical, okay? The way to solve shame and thus internal loneliness, right, is that you're gonna get closer and closer and closer to that part that you have decided you hate. Now, this is the point at which I have to break it to you. Some of you are already on this path, but most people find the path of spirituality and self-development hoping that it's gonna feel amazing from day one, right? Well, you know who you are. You found Spirituality 101, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I create my reality. You guys, this is awesome. I can just focus positively all day long, right? How long does that last? Well, this is why it doesn't last long. Because genuine healing brings us back in the direction of the aspects of ourselves that we have denied, rejected, and disowned. It's inevitable. Because genuine healing is about becoming whole. If the wounding is fragmentation, right, then the healing is to come back together. Now, some of you have heard me say this before, but it's really important to say again because I want you to literally write this in your journals, okay? To heal is to experience the opposite. It's literally that simple. You guys, this is like a big deal. It's not like a little deal. This is what I mean by that, okay? If you break your leg, leg is broken. To heal is, what's the opposite of broken? Put it back together again. If the wound is, I'm lonely, what's the opposite? To heal is connection. If you want to understand healing, any type of healing, it's literally just to experience the opposite. So as long as you figure out what the opposite is, you now know what you have to get somebody to. So it's about connecting a person from where they are to that place, which is the opposite experience. So as it applies to this, the fragmentation, the healing is to become whole again. So all forces in the universe are kind of, fueling the idea that you need to come back in contact with the aspects of yourself you've cut off from. But this is why your path of spirituality is going to hurt. It's going to be uncomfortable. Because we were trained that to get close to that means what? Death. I'm serious. So I just showed you that whole entire thing where, okay, well, if I get close to my loudness, then I lose mom. So your entire nervous system is programmed to believe that by getting closer to these aspects, you are literally going to die. It's no joke. What a spiritual teacher like me is asking you to do is to be in the most pain you've ever been in, basically. Because in order to heal, I'm saying go back in the direction of those things you think are going to kill you. So if some of you are feeling like crap in your spiritual practice, you're probably on the right path. So, the first thing that I need you to do is I need you to stop seeing yourself as a singularity. If we want to heal the fragmentation, we have to start from where we are, which is in a state of fragmentation. Now, when I come up to you and I stick out my hand and I introduce myself as Teal Swan, that name makes me singular, doesn't it? This is not the truth of any of us. You don't know it, though, because I'm not like, my name is Teal, my name is Michelle, my name is Nancy, my name is Steve, right? Because I don't introduce myself that way, you see me as a singularity, and we, because we call ourselves by one name, see ourselves as a singularity. And unless you have multiple personality disorder, you're not actually seeing yourself clearly. What did I just say? What I am saying is that we all have multiple personality disorder. The point at which we call it a disorder is the point at which it starts to scare people because we're calling ourselves by different names and losing memory. We're in a dissociative state. But everybody has multiple personalities. Everyone. We just call them sides, right? How many of you have gone out on a date with a girl and she's like, oh my gosh, thanks for opening the door, and 2 minutes later at her work, she's like, get out of my freaking office. Yeah, that is a split. And usually we have no conscious control over our aspects, right? These fragments within us, it's like they control us. It's almost like, I'm going to do a little demo, right? It's you, okay? We, whatever aspect of us that we identify with, because it's going to keep us safe in whatever given moment, that's the one that takes us over. So let's say she goes on a date, right? Maybe I'm the person, this will be a funny one, okay? Maybe I'm the aspect of her that's super glamorous. Maybe way back in childhood, I was the one that watched Marilyn Monroe and realized that guys would like that better. So when she introduces herself to a guy, me, as her personality fragment, may come up and go, I'm not kidding you. If you start looking at the world in this way, and even yourself in this way, it's going to blow your mind. Because you will literally watch this personality takeover happen in real time. But it will help you understand the world so much more. Not only that, it's going to... Hi. I wonder what you're suppressing. Well, internally, what it's going to do for you to start seeing yourself in this way is you're going to actually be able to figure out how to end this pattern of isolation internally. And you're going to understand what self-love actually is. So this is the first thing I want you to do. As a little experiment, I want you to begin seeing yourself not as a singularity, but as this very fragmented being. It's almost like internally, I want you to see yourself like stained glass. You know how stained glass, you've got all these different sort of fractal patterns going on, right? Where you've got a shard of red glass and then a shard of blue glass. That's actually what all people are like internally. Some people are more shattered than others. But all of you have these parts. And if you actually start to address them or deal with them as if they are individual identities, you'll become able to bring them forward. So it's almost like we're accepting the fact that we have multiple personalities in order to unite them all. Interesting, huh? So what is self-love? Self-love is the process of taking something as part of yourself, taking a part of you as part of yourself. Do you understand love? To love something is to take it as part of yourself. It's very simple, actually. We assume that love has to be this super positive emotional state that we feel towards something and that we can't control it. That's not love. Mostly that's attraction. I'll be demolishing that in my speech tomorrow. But to love something is to take it as part of you, but intentionally with your conscious will. And so when you have aspects of yourself you've pushed away because you feel shame, right, towards them, you've created this internal fragmentation, you've pushed it away. That's the opposite of love, right? So to love something is to bring it in and make it a part of yourself. It's to say, hi, loudness, I take you as part of myself. I see that you are the reality. Now here's the bad news / good news. Anything that you identify with, I mean anything, you can't cut it off anymore. Because even if you don't want it to be a part of you and it's the thing you hate about you, because you have identified it as part of you, you have no other option than to bring it closer. So think about it right now. Like, what is it that people have made you feel the most ashamed about? You just mentioned it earlier today in this little process I had to do. Do you have it in your head? There's no getting away from that. There's no convincing you that you aren't that way. It's how do I find approval for it? Now, this is the way to do it. If this is you, right, and you've made an enemy of your loudness in this case, the first thing that you're going to do is address your loudness as if it's a separate being. Pretty easy to do in this case, right?
Hi, loudness.
Now you're going to try to relate to it. That's what you haven't been doing when you've pushed it away. You've not been relating to it, right?
Yeah.
How could you relate to this aspect? If I told you today that there is no way you're ever going to not have this as part of you,
What is your true nature?
now, see what she started to do is that energy, she turned towards it. Did you see that? She's like, okay, maybe there has to be some sort of commitment. So she began, what you just probably couldn't see visually, is that she started to commit to it. To commit is to put your energy into something. So this is the process of intimacy, which is the reversal of this isolation pattern. Intimacy, what is it? It's to see into someone, to feel into someone, to listen to someone, so as to completely understand them. It's to become an expert on it. So she's now going to commit to a process of becoming an expert on the aspect of her that is loud. Why are you loud? What are you trying to get? When did this begin? You don't know the answer, do you?
Attention.
Okay, so let's say that that aspect says, I need attention. This is very valuable, right? Because in a state of rejection, she's going to go, well, it's not okay to get attention, right? Is that true? No, see, we're taking everything that this other aspect is giving us as valid. Now, there's a difference between valid and true, okay? So I might look at you and say, I feel like a frickin' idiot. That may not be true, but I'm still valid to feel that way. This is really important for you to develop this capacity to see the difference between truth and validity when it deals with human beings, because this is really where relationships begin. When I can look at somebody and say, your perspectives are valid, your feelings are valid, and it's up to me to try to understand that. That's where we have an open door for connection, right? So with these parts of you you've pushed away, we even just that in a tiny little bit, we found out, okay, so the loudness is needing attention. That's a valid need, you guys. Now, it's not up to you to say you don't get to need that need. That's super harsh and not okay when you're trying to unite yourself or unite with somebody else. It's about, okay, well, if that's your need, how do we get that need met? Because you've got to start to take the best interests of these aspects of you as part of you, That's what love really does, if you want to know the beauty of it and why it's safe. If I love you, I am connected to you, and in the connection, I can't hurt you without hurting me. That's the kind of world we actually do need to create, right? It would be impossible to bomb someone. I could not do that if I was genuinely connected. What happens when I'm connected to you is that your best interests are now part of mine. That's your safety, by the way. If you want to write down, what is social safety? It's your best interests are part of my best interests. This is not codependency. Codependency is your best interests are all that matters and mine don't matter anymore. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they become a part of each other. So if there's this beautiful exchange of best interests, now when we're trying to decide what to do, like a decision, right? It's about what's your best interest and what's my best interest, and we have to come up with a third option that makes that work.
Cooperation.
Yeah, I guess cooperation. On crack. So you understand this. When you find these aspects of us, and actually I have people when I'm trying to teach them a sort of graduated process of this, I have them start to identify these shifts. So in your body, like when she sort of switches into the loud one, she can feel the shame, first of all. That's what tells you that you've got a shame self present. In the book, I go into what a shame self is. But she can feel that come up, and underneath the shame, also, she can feel the way that her body changes. When you have a sort of personality takeover from one of these fragmented aspects, your body will feel different. And you will gravitate towards different clothes. You'll gravitate towards different entertainment options. I mean, it's crazy. It's almost like a totally different person operating in your body. When you start to pay attention to this, it will scare the crap out of you, in a good way. When that happens, she's going to try to see into, feel into, listen to, and come to completely understand that aspect. And when you do this, it is my absolute promise to you that you start to understand what the needs of these individual fragments are, why they are there, why they exist, why they were created in the first place. And that's when you have the key to meeting those needs. If she, in this particular scenario, starts to enable this one to actually get the attention it wants, then through the connection, it will no longer take on such a negative expression. Now, this is really revolutionary, what I'm about to share with you, because most people who are going to be resisting me in the future when I take this into prison programs, most people don't understand why connection is such a critical thing to create. Because this is why. If I establish a connection with this person, let's say that this is a hardened criminal in this case, not just an aspect within me that feels shame. If this is a hardened criminal and I actually manage to create a sense of connection with this person, then the way that the character traits of this person express cannot injure me without injuring him or her. Do you see how important that is? Through creating connection, I make it impossible for this one to express in a negative way, which is why, for example, let's go internal again. If I have an aspect that is an energy vampire, right? And if I start to accept the aspect of me that's an energy vampire, through establishing the connection, this one can no longer express energy vampirism in a way that is damaging. Instead, it switches to a way that is benefiting me. So the way that that would manifest is, instead of sucking energy from the room and from anybody, regardless of whether that's healthy energy for them or not, they begin actually to suck energy that is detrimental to people. So energy vampires, for example, once they have that sense of connection and that sense of approval and even value, they start to be the best energy workers on the planet. They can be in the room with somebody who's got cancer and literally, it's crazy, you guys. But we want to become comfortable with this concept, because the world in the state that it's in today, where we continue to push away aspects of ourselves and do it externally as well, that's why we're in the state of fragmentation that we're in, and it's going to get worse. It's getting worse every day. That's why you've got kids that are shooting up schools. It's why you've got people declaring war left and right. It's why you've got politicians that have absolutely no connection to the people that they lead, right? We have got to be brave enough to end this within society, because let's just take the prison population, right? They are our externalized shame. That's why, me personally, my vision for the future is justice reform. It's what I'm the most interested in, because that is the collective human shadow. And I want it to actually cause you pain now. When you read these news, I want it to cause you pain. No, but here's the thing. When you read these news articles and we demonize people, we're actually damning ourselves. Because the people who are rotting in the jail cells today, they are our externalized shame. It's that when you were younger, mom turned against you and your desire to, have something. And so we go, oh, well, it's not okay to want to have anything. We shove it away. Now that's a criminal who steals something. Now, we are doing this externally all day. We're taking those things we don't want to associate with, whether it's sexuality and saying, oh, you're a total whore, or whether it's like the aspect of us that feels rage and we're like, oh, you're a criminal, We're doing this to everything. And it's a mirror, a perfect mirror of what's happening on the inside. And we're making each other miserably lonely because of it. So my mission, if you will, is to create a society where the process of socialization doesn't cause this internal fragmentation. It is actually possible for you to educate a child to take you as the parent as part of itself. So this is where socialization is headed. I want you to feel, you're like, oh, it's a pick-me-up in Teal's speech for once. Where we're headed is that when we start to socialize our children, we're going to be teaching them very early on to consider the parents' best interests while we consider their best interests. This is not narcissistic parenting. It's not, you need to think about me all the time. I know that some of you had those types of parents. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about educating a child into what it means to have a relationship. So we'll think about how that impacts mommy right now, and I'll think about how that impacts you right now. And so you're teaching a child to always find the third option, where both of your needs are met, instead of creating this internal fragmentation and perpetuating it, because we have to start with childhood. Because when we grow up, we think this is a normal way of dealing with things. That's why we have created the society we have today. That's why we have the justice system we have today. It's even why we have the structure of the cities that we have today, where we're so segregated and no longer living in what's natural to a human being, which is actually tribe. So that's where I'm headed. Do you guys get it so far? Okay. So fear is another thing that creates this sense of isolation and loneliness in the world. Fear is much more easy to understand than shame, because what I just showed you is internal fragmentation. Fear is simply the opposite of love. So if to love is to take something as part of yourself, to fear, which is the exact opposite of love, is to push something away from yourself. That simple. If I am fearing this thing, I'm pushing it away. I can't do that without creating that gap within me, and thus creating the isolation and that loneliness. But here's where we go wrong with fear. We have aspects of ourselves that are afraid, right? So in that scenario, I'm the one feeling afraid, so I'm pushing you away. So I represent in this scenario a fear self. What do we do with that in the spiritual field and in the self-help field? Don't be afraid. So what you just told her is, don't be me. Did you enhance the split or make it better?
We process the fear till it goes away.
How do you process fear?
We're allowed to exist.
Well, yeah, you're just like answering my questions perfectly. What we need to do with fear is the opposite of what we've done as well. And actually, with your fear self, right, the best thing to do with this is to bring it into the center of the relationship. But that's not something that we think of doing, right? And it's sort of why I challenged you tonight. I wanted you to bring your shame into the center of the relationship, because those things, it's the shame and the fear that we have that causes us to keep ourselves separate and away from people. Now, if I want company for those aspects, which is what we need, because right now I'm separated, right, as the fear self, What you need to do is to not only bring me closer to you, okay, I accept the fear, so you would actually feel the fear, not try to convince yourself it doesn't exist. Once she feels the fear, she gets to bring me. See, she's doing it nicely. She's not bulldozing me. She's still taking my best interests into account, and she's pulling me into the center of the relationship. So if she's in a relationship with somebody and I'm terrified of being in a relationship, she's bringing the fear into the center of the relationship. Now, I know that sounds simple, but none of us do it. When you're on a first date, how many of you are like, I'm terrified right now? No, really, like, raise your hands, come on. Like 3 of you. Yeah. Well, that's the reality of us, right? We're hiding most of ourselves. So wouldn't it be revolutionary if what a relationship entails is to bring all of you forward and on the table? That means the good, the bad, the ugly, and the awesome, right? Well, this is what I'm trying to do. But listen to that. That's really important, though. See, she says, everyone's going to run away if I do that. What the hell kind of world are we living in? And where does this end? That's my question. You know, there comes a point where it's like, if you want to change, you got to be the change. I made a commitment. You guys, you have free will. You have complete free will. I can't take it away from you, even when I want to sometimes. Because you have free will, it's up to you what you commit to. I got to a point in my life where I was so damn lonely that I couldn't do it anymore. And, you know, a lot of people don't like when I talk this way, but that was the gift of me being suicidal. I mean, there's a gift in every experience. The gift for me was, I can't live like this. So what I decided is I'm completely committed to bringing all of myself into the center of the table. And if somebody can't take it, that's not the type of world I'm wanting to create. So there has to come a point where you're like brave enough to say, I'm just going to be the change. And being the change means being willing to bring all parts of yourself to the center of a relationship. If you're terrified, it means saying, I'm terrified right now. If you're angry, it means I'm angry right now. Right? And not just being the change in that way, also letting people do the same thing. So being the change means, let me see all of you. Bring it. And noticing, this is the important part, noticing that if she says something or does something or brings a part of herself into the relationship where I'm like, screw that, right? It's not actually about her. It's about there's some aspect of me that I've done that to. You see, so this is what's happening. In the external world, when I'm getting close to something that's terrifying me out here, it's actually a mirror of something I've pushed away inside. So when I get triggered, this is the real cool part of this. When I get super triggered by somebody externally, I go, crap, all right. There's a part inside me that I've pushed away that mirrors that one. So I go looking for that part internally and do that process of really seeing into it, feeling into it, listening to it, so as to completely understand it. By doing that commitment process, I'm bringing it closer to myself. Guess what happens? I'm no longer triggered by this. Now, the people, those of you who can actually do this process, you are the game changers on this planet.
How would you spot what you're actually looking for if somebody's triggering you? Are you doing that there and then while they're still staring at you, or are you taking it home and working on it?
You can make up your mind. It depends on what person in your general life experience is open and which is not. I've pretty much surrounded myself with people who get to accept this is the way that I am. Some of you are not in those positions yet. I'm still working on changing society. You're going to have to play this by ear for you, but for me, I've decided to commit to this line of work. I'm Teal Swan. So at this point, I can look at somebody and be like, this is my work. And they just get to be annoyed if they're annoyed, because my commitment is to this process, right?
The other way around is when you're feeling triggered by someone you're with. How would you know?
Me? Like this. His question was, how do you know? So if you feel triggered by somebody, right? How do you find the part within you that's very easily? I look at this aspect and I say, what's driving me crazy about them? Are they a social climber? Are they super sexual? Do they love attention? Like, what is it about them that I hate? Okay, now there's that aspect in me, so I start to look for it. So I play this game. This is a process that I can teach people. I play this game where I actually allow that part to assume my entire body. So it's almost like you're allowing a channeling to take place. By the way, channeling is a really fancy word for willing possession. To become possessed by one of your own internal parts is safe because they do it anyways. But what I'll do, let's say that I'm triggered by her, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna figure out what I can't stand about her, right? Maybe she's a social climber. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, I choose with my free will to allow the part of me that's a social climber to take over my body. Now I'll close my eyes, and as if I'm literally letting my body just be taken over by that energy. I'm not thinking about it. This is the most important part when you're actually doing genuine channeling work. I don't want to think about what I'm feeling. I just let it take over my body. I see how my body starts feeling. I start to see how I'm thinking. I start to notice that maybe when I'm in a room, I'm constantly thinking about who would be the best contact that I could get for my own advancement. Now, I just literally am like looking at it. So this is what intimacy is, right? I'm looking really deeply, trying to understand it in full-blown observation and questioning mode. But I am at all times realizing and reminding yourself, which you have to do, this is a part of me. By virtue of doing that, you will relate to it. I mean, how many of you know when you watch a movie and there's like a character that all people despise, but for some reason you're like, I really kind of like that character? It's because you relate to them. So we played this process with these internal aspects. Now, I've surrounded myself in my life with a group of people that are just used to the fact that this is the kind of process work we're always doing. So if we're in the middle of dinner, I'm like, wait a minute, I just felt one come up. And then everyone's like, like watching and doing their own process work. But obviously, if you're like working at a corporate job and you can't get away to a cubicle somewhere, putting it off is okay. It's just, the more sort of triggered you are, the more juicy that negative emotional state is, the easier it is to get into that actual feeling. I was doing this one time, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I was doing this one time with a serial killer. So in my childhood, the man who I was with actually killed children. So I was one of those people for a lot of years. It was like if somebody brought up the idea of serial killers are killing somebody, I was like, no, okay, no. It wasn't until the day that I actually made myself go into my own internal serial killer. Now, hold on to that thought, because I'm about to mess you up here for a minute. It wasn't until I went into that I really understood anything about my own abuser. That was the process that revolutionized it for me, and ultimately will make it so that somebody like me is capable of working with individuals who have that condition. I got into that part of me, and I realized I went to a real dark mental state. But I realized actually that I was so lonely. I mean, so lonely. This is going to get gruesome. The idea of rolling around in someone's decapitated body parts felt like closeness to me. Like the idea of having to kill someone to make them stay put instead of leave me is where I had to get to emotionally to relate to that. And once I found that level of loneliness, I never had the same judgment towards serial killers. And why is this important? You don't have to panic about the idea that owning these aspects of yourself are going to make you a serial killer. That's just what your mom convinced you of, right? Mom says, don't accept your loudness or you're going to be obnoxious, right? It's not actually what happens. When you start to accept parts of yourself, like me, accepting Teal's internal serial killer, I'm not killing people. Quite the opposite. What's happening now is that I have an appreciation for the depth of isolation that brings a person to the state where they have to do that kind of thing. Now, when I walk into a room, a complete different shift happens when I'm working with somebody, say, who's in a jail and who has killed someone. The kind of work I can do with that person is incredible now. Because when I'm walking in the door, I'm not starting with a push away. That's where most people start. When a cop walks in the door, who's not trained in this type of stuff, when a cop walks through the door with a serial killer, it's already a dude, fuck that, we can't work with someone from this set point. I mean, we should already accept this when we're in the therapy setting. I mean, you guys probably know what it feels like to sit down in front of a therapist. You can feel it when you step through the door and they're looking at you like, They've already judged what you did as wrong, so they're not going to understand it. And if we can't understand it, we're never going to be able to create a different way of meeting these people's needs. So I need you to get this. Once you start to get close to these aspects of yourself that you've cut away, what you have been told will happen, which is demise, losing your life, losing the people around you, never getting a date, it's not going to happen. That's just what they threatened you with so that you would comply at that age. And it's only when we find that kind of understanding that we can actually meet the needs of these parts. And when we meet the needs, they're not going to feel the need to manipulate. Can we talk about manipulation? Manipulation is not evil at all. Literally, there is nothing malevolent about it. What manipulation is I can't ask for a need up front. So I have to go in the back door to get it. So here's manipulation, right? I actually manipulated you guys tonight. Did you know that? Do you want to know how? I like it when you look at me and think that I am pretty. But by raise of hands, women, how many of you feel comfortable to say that? A lot more than I thought. Well, keep your hands up. Come on. Now look around at each other. That's how many females feel comfortable to do that. And you're like, oh yeah, you're not comfortable if you're like this. What we are taught is that it's not acceptable to walk in the door and be like, I want you to think that I'm gorgeous. Because I like that energy, right? Thank you. But I manipulated you, didn't I? It was a good manipulation. I wore a really awesome dress tonight. And I'm also aware of it. But I didn't say anything about it. I just literally went and got what I wanted in the back door. Now, this is not a manipulation tactic that really hurt anyone. Yes. But that's all any manipulation is. Any manipulation. It's just, I found a back doorway instead of a straight through the front doorway to get my need met. Does that make sense?
It's also authenticity as well for you.
Authenticity?
It's also authenticity for you to allow that aspect to come forward.
Yes. Well, speaking of authenticity, in my findings about loneliness, lack of authenticity is really what's creating this condition of loneliness. Because look, and this goes into this fragmentation process. If this aspect hasn't really owned the loudness as part of itself, it's not really authentic, is it? Your personalities are totally false. Do you want to know why? Can I demonstrate why? Yes. Now that I've collapsed your reality even more? All right, so another demonstration. Come over this way. I want you to pretend, line up behind me. Okay, we're all a singularity again. We're a 4-year-old child in this case. And at 4 years old, let's say that Daddy leaves me, leaves the family. He's gone. What I've got as the truth of me is I've got a part of me that's really, really hurt. Can you feel this energy? I've got this part of me that needed Dad. I really needed that support, and now he's vanished, and I don't know what it means, and I'm making it mean something about me. That's the truth of this vulnerable self. This isn't keeping me very safe, is it? Because chances are there's nobody here in my life at this age to work through this emotionally with me so that I don't create a fragment. What I got to do is really quick figure out how to cope. So what I do is I create an aspect that doesn't, you got to look less vulnerable. I got to create an aspect that doesn't care whether I have closeness with someone. I have to create a super independent aspect that's like, I don't need anybody. I'm going to climb on the counters and get my own food. Screw him. If Dad left, then Dad left. See? So this is actually, both are part of this person, me in this case, both are part of me. But I am going to identify with the hand holding. This is identification. I'm going to take this as part of me because this is the one that keeps me safe. That didn't keep me safe, does it? With that one, I can't climb on the counters and get my own food, which I'm basically expected to do because when Dad left, Mom had to get a full-time job. So the way that I stay safe is by identifying with the aspect that's super independent. Now, because I'm connected to this one, I've suppressed that one. This is the one that shines through me. Now, when you meet me, this is all you're going to feel. I'm going to be the person that's like super independent, super in your face. I get what I want. I don't need anyone. And when you describe me to your friends, this is how you're going to describe me. Is it the truth of me? It's half of the truth of me. But this is what you're calling your personality. Your personality is literally nothing more than an amalgamation of what keeps you safe. More specifically, what kept you safe in childhood. And you're so identified with it, you see it as yourself. So this process of integration, it will introduce you to who you really are and the life you really want to lead. I can't even tell you how beautiful it will get. But it will get beautiful on the heels of realizing, crap, I'm not just this independent aspect. I have an aspect of me that really does need people. I have an aspect that was really hurt by that as a kid. I have a vulnerability that I haven't connected to. Now, many of you know what it feels like for the universe to slam you into this type of awareness. I call these the whack-a-tree at 70-mile-an-hour spiritual experiences. Suddenly you have cancer, right? Chances are what that does is it puts you back in touch in one fell swoop with these aspects you've cut off from. You know? I have a lot of friends actually who are paraplegic and who are paralyzed, and their experiences, they'll literally tell me 100%. They were entirely over here coping like this until the day they got in that accident, and then they realized the reason that it happened is because, you know, the universe basically is trying to get them to realign with all these aspects. The ones that really did need someone. Now they're having to depend on people 24 hours a day. They're like, well, I wish I would have learned in a different way, but I definitely refound that aspect. So, you know, I would love it if we could get to the point where we created this kind of integration intentionally instead of having to line up with these incredibly painful experiences externally in order to create that alignment. Not that it's wrong if it happens that way. Some of us like to learn the hard way. But I wouldn't wish it for you. So, does anybody have, I know I have like 5 more minutes, and of course I took up the time like I usually do. Does anybody have any question along the lines of loneliness?
How do you develop enough trust to do that?
I'm going to pass the mic.
Self-trust to do
Okay.
Hi. How do you develop enough self-trust to do this?
To do what?
To do this accurately, 100%. How do you... It depends, because I feel like the power dynamics within the parts themselves, how do you develop the kind of self-trust that makes you do that accurately?
You start it with emotions. So the first form of self-abandonment, which is obviously, if you're abandoning yourself, that's like the most intense violation that you can have. The first form of self-abandonment happens when you feel an emotion. Now, all you have to do to understand what we as people do with emotions is go down to any London street at 10 o'clock at night. What do you see? Are these people who are actually going into their emotions, or are they escaping from them? Most of them are stressed as hell because of their job. So what do? We drink ourselves away from them. That's self-abandonment. That's one form of many. So I'll tell you what it looks like in the moment. Let's say that this is an emotion. Now, emotions, they're closely linked to these parts we've cut off within ourselves. So let's say that I walk into a party and it feels like crap, right? This could be for positive emotional states too, but we tend to be okay with that. We tend to bounce out of our negative emotional states. So I walk into a party, it feels like crap. Now, it's this part that's feeding that emotion to me. That emotion is an indication of a truth belonging to this aspect of me. Now, if I feel that feeling and I go, well, screw it, tape over the mouth, like, I'm just going to sit here at this table and force myself through this emotion. Do you see what I've just done? Have I taken the best interest of that part into account? No, I've bulldozed it in that case. Another thing I can do is say, I feel that feeling, and I'm like, somebody give me a gin and tonic, right? What have I just done? I've just abandoned that aspect. So self-trust, and where this really starts to get good with your internal work, is you begin to be with feelings and listen to the truth behind the feeling. So if I get in that scenario, let's say I walk into the bar, I feel like crap. And trust me, you can do this, because I had to teach myself. I might lean up against the wall, and instead of instantly escaping from it, or I may even let them sit me down, or not, right? I may lean up against the wall, I close my eyes, and I go towards the emotion. Going towards an emotion, what does that mean? It means that I decide to feel it. You're almost inviting it to become more. An emotion always shows up as a sensation in your body. That's something to understand. Because when we talk about emotions, it gets rather abstract, right? It always shows up as a sensation. So anxiety, for example, might show up as tension, like a tightness, may show up as buzzing. I just want to literally allow it, almost like, this is sort of a rough example, but let's say that I was going to inject heroin in my veins. You wouldn't watch me fighting against it. What you'd watch me do is literally surrendering, because I like that feeling, right? I would just let it come over my whole body, but I'm actually intentionally doing this with the emotion in this experience. And what I'm doing is listening to whatever messages it has. Now that sounds abstract, but once you start doing this with emotion, it'll always kick thoughts to the surface. I don't like it here. People are looking at me weird. These are the truths below the emotion. So I'm listening to them, and I'm taking them as important. It's not about whether they're true or not, they're important. So based off of listening to them, it's very easy to ascertain, actually, whether they're coming from previous traumas or whether it's expressing some need. Now, I might say, okay, so right now I'm not feeling comfortable in this situation because it's so crowded. Now then I get to ask myself, is it self-loving? What would someone who loves themselves do? Would someone who loves themselves stay here and force themselves to do that, despite the crowd? Or would somebody who loves themselves maybe put on a jacket with a hood so it feels less intimidating? Or would they leave the building? Right there in that moment, that personal truth opens up options for me. And I get to take the option that considers the best interests of this aspect of me. And when you start making those decisions and actually feeling the feeling, this one starts to feel like I have its best interest at heart. That's what trust is. To trust something is to rely upon the fact that it's going to capitalize on your best interests. That simple. So when I start connecting in that way, this internal part of me says, oh, you are going to capitalize on my best interests. It starts to trust me. Now it's part of me, so I start to feel that self-trust. And this is what I'll leave you with tonight. The reason this is so important is because all these fragmented aspects, right? They're all inside your body. You cannot escape from them. And once you accept that, it's going to change your life. Because if this aspect of me feels like crap, I will feel like crap. There is no exception to the rule. So I have one option, and that is to consider its best interests. So for this reason, I've taught you to see yourself not as a singularity, but in terms of all these fragmented aspects of selves. They're all your internal Siamese twins. You're familiar with conjoined twins or Siamese twins? All these aspects are Siamese twins because they operate within the same body. Internal peace is a state of non-conflict between all of these internal Siamese twins. That's what peace means.
This is the last question.
Yeah, thanks. It's very important for me. Like when you have these emotions running through your body, like when something you don't know what is triggered it, like, do you have to do this listening to your emotions only innerly, or is it okay also to like actually express it and talk through it to the people? I'm fucking scared now.
Thank you.
I'm really, it's like, it's not the first time, but when I speak in public, it's like my heart is beating super fast, and I'm like, And the only way I can get over it is by actually opening up about it. That's the only way either that or I'm leaving that part of myself behind.
Well, good. So you just brought it, you did what I asked of you. You brought it into the center of the circle and actually caused many of us to feel better. So here's your answer. Many of the needs of these parts are to be able to express, because that's what you were never allowed to do. So, yes, there's going to be many times where you don't just process it internally. Now, there's a real good tool you can use within your social circles for this, and it's kind of a cue to tell people to get ready. I call it my shadow moment. So I will walk into the room if I feel like expressing myself, and I will say, all right, you guys, I'm having a shadow moment. Now, this is my indication that you guys now get to hold space for it. And what I'm about to say, it needs to be important to you. This is the real important part to get. It has to be important to you, but you shouldn't let it hit you completely, because this is just me expressing, sort of like I'm spitting flames, right? Now, when I walk in and do that, it's very easy for the members in a community, if they are aware that this is what's going to be going on, to hold the space for that, and it is so healing. But I want you to remember this. It is critical that you keep that idea that anything somebody feels is valid and important, regardless of whether it's ultimately objectively true or not. It is valid and is important, because where we go wrong with this, container holding is when somebody says shadow moment and people go, okay, well then it doesn't matter what they say. No, it really does. Like, I'm speaking something that's like true for me. It may be raw, and it's definitely not the total truth of me, right? If somebody like me walks in the door and says, God, I just want to kill people right now, obviously not all of me feels that way, but I might need in that moment to have that one part of me express that. And that can be so powerfully healing when we have that. So no, you don't need to just only do it yourself. But we do have to begin listening to ourselves, which we don't do. We're in this phase within our lives where almost everything we feel we get out of, we deny, we disown. So your first step towards self-trust is to really feel those feelings. Be with them. Listen to what's underneath them.
Do you have a video about anger?
I have one.
Rage.
I have a video about anger and rage, yes. And Blake's coming up here to wrap me up. Okay, so that was your little sampling. I swear, in this book that I wrote, I go into way more detail about how to go about doing these things. And I break down these pillars of loneliness and the concept of shame finer and finer and finer so that you can actually figure out how to apply it perfectly in your life. This was my very abridged version to what was a 3-year process for me. But it is my hope personally that after you read this book or after you hear this type of thing, you can start to take these parts of yourself as parts of yourself again, so that we can create a society where it is not based on shame, where we're not teaching each other how to participate based on making an enemy of parts of each other or ourselves. And when we have a world that's safe, that's the kind of life that I want to be living in. So I would love for you to join me, because this is the point in our life where we have to just literally commit to being the change. To be the change means be 100% authentic. Bring yourself into the center of a relationship and let other people do that. And when you do that, you will actually feel connection. So thank you for having me.